The basic building blocks of a photovoltaic solar power system are few and simple. It's not rocket science, it's basic electronics. Let's take a look. When you're talking about solar photovoltaic power systems, there are primarily two types. The grid tie, where you're hooked up to the utility, and the battery backed up off-grid system, which is the one we're focusing in on in this video. Now, we will talk about grid tie a little bit, so you'll know about it and you can make an informed decision. So what are the basic components of a battery-based photovoltaic solar power system? The first is the solar panels themselves, and these convert sunlight directly into DC electricity. The next is the charge controller, and this is the item that takes the power from the solar panels and manages the charging of your batteries. The third is the batteries themselves, and this is where the electricity coming from the solar panels through the charge controller is stored so that you can use it when the sun is not out. The last major component is the inverter, and this is what takes the DC electricity from the battery bank and converts it into AC household current so that you can use it in your home. At each of the arrows in between them, there are fuses, circuit breakers, or disconnect switches. Now let's take a look at the building blocks of a grid tie photovoltaic power system. The first again are the solar panels that are making DC power directly from sunlight. The next is the grid tie inverter or synchronous inverter that takes the DC from the solar panels, changes it into AC power, and then synchronizes it with the commercial grid power. At the end, your system connects directly to the commercial power lines. At this stage, you're acting just like any power station, delivering power directly into the commercial power lines. You can add a battery bank to a grid tie system. It'll increase the cost significantly, but can give you a few days of backup power in case the main power grid does go down. In this case, you will still need an inspection from the electrical utility and, most likely, a commercial person to install the system. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of each one of these systems? A battery system is often used where commercial power isn't available. Batteries are expensive and the cost of a battery system is higher, but if you have no power available from the commercial lines, you have to use a battery backed up system. On the plus side, if you use a battery system during power outages, you will have power. In most municipalities, if you're the owner of the home and you're not connecting to the electrical mains, you can be the installer of the battery-based photovoltaic power system. Grid tie systems have become more popular lately because of their simplicity and because tax incentives have become available from federal and local entities, which make feeding power into the grid more economically attractive. And to do this, you have to have a thing called net metering. This is an arrangement with the state and power company that allows you to connect to the lines and feed power back into the grid. With this type of system, this is where people say you're spinning the meter backwards. Well, this is the type of system that can do that, where you're using the grid to actually take your power and then take your power back out at nighttime. So remember to consider all these things when you're determining which type of system you're going to install. Electric codes vary from location to location, so we can't cover them all here. If you're doing a grid tie system, you'll have to hire an electrician who may have to pull a permit, and you'll also have to sign an agreement with your local electric provider and likely have an inspection from them as well. Incentives can be for grid tie systems or battery backed up systems and come from many different places. Let's take a look at some of them. The first are federal programs and tax credits. Under current law, up to the year 2016, you can get 30% of the money back of your hardware outlay in tax credits. That's right off the bottom line of what you're going to owe in taxes. For systems installed after 2009 up to 2016, there is no cap on that tax credit. If you're in a state that has a state income tax, go ahead and check the tax codes to see if they have incentives on alternative power systems. Many municipalities also offer rebate programs for alternative energy. Check those as well. In some places, the power company themselves offer a rebate program, usually for installing grid tie power systems on their power lines. Now, I mentioned net metering. This is the law that allows you to connect a grid tie solar power system to the commercial power lines. Net metering is the arrangement whereby the electric utility agrees to let the private electricity generator become a source of power which feeds their commercial power grid. When the private generator system is making more power than he's personally using, the meter spins backwards, indicating that his excess power is feeding back into the commercial power grid. The private user then can take power back out for his own use from the commercial power grid when he isn't generating his own power. Net metering makes it feasible to sell power to the commercial power company. You may or may not have net metering in your jurisdiction. Now remember, the downside on the grid tie is that during a power outage, by law, your system has to shut down and disconnect from the lines. There may be workmen out there trying to restore power and working on the lines, and they can't have you feeding power into it. So unless you have extra batteries hooked up, you will be out of power during a general power outage. Once you weigh all the facts and the incentives, you're going to know pretty quickly what type of system you want to install, a battery backed up or a grid tie system. At that point, you're going to then determine how large the system is that you're going to install, and that's going to be determined by your needs and your budget. From there, you're going to select your components and then the vendors to acquire them from. It's like any other project. First, define the goal, the system and how it's going to be done, identify the resources and where you're going to get the parts, and then execute the project. So what did we learn in Chapter 3? Number 1, there are two types of systems, grid tie and battery based. Number 2, there are 3 to 4 major components to a system: the solar panels, the charge controller, the inverter, and possibly the batteries. Number 3, you choose a battery-based system when you aren't near the commercial power or you want to be off the grid, completely disconnected. Number 4, you choose a grid tie system when there are incentives which significantly reduce the cost of your system, tax incentives, local, federal, etc. And number 5, first off, identify the equipment vendors you're going to use and get an installation team together.